notes if you need them.
That's mine. All right. I'll leave that.
Mark, you need.
Yeah. Okay. Now, can everybody hear me?
Right. Yep.
Okay. First of all, I want to start. This picture was taken on February 14th, 1945. We had bombed Vienna, and we'd gone to several targets first, and they were covered over, and so we ended up bombing Vienna, and we were on the way home. And this area wasn't supposed to have any flak, but all of a sudden they must have run in a bunch of railroad flak guns, and I was trying to get some pictures of the flak when I seen that I was in the lead airplane flying co-pilot on the low left squadron, and I seen the tail end Charlie of the lead squadron get this direct hit. And if you look at it, you can see the kid's parachute that was killed right behind the hole. It's that little white puffy stuff. And in our squadron, we flew as a family, more or less. Each crew was its own, excepting for the orientation flights to start with. And so this particular squadron, he didn't think that that was right. He didn't want people flying together that knew each other, because then if somebody got killed, whether they would be worse off for it. So it was Robert Koch's first flight, and it was also Bob Cummings' first flight. He was the tail gunner on that airplane there. And I took this picture probably 15, 20 seconds after he got hit. Then he dropped down out of sight. And I had tried to roll the camera, and it was the last shot on the roll. So it was just as well. But the pilot or co-pilot, I don't know who, called me and asked me how bad they were hit. Actually, he asked anybody that could give him a report. And I told him about the damage, and he said, well, I can't even tell the crew to bail out because he says all the lines are cut. And I told him, well, don't bail them out here because we were over in an area where they not only killed you, but they tortured you to death. The Germans had convinced this little band of people in the mountains to make a thing out of torturing anybody they caught. So he managed to fly it back 400 miles and landed at Foggia, Maine without breaking the tail off, believe it or not. But the only thing that's really holding it together is the top of the airplane with the tail fin. Now, when we were assigned to help the frontline troops with the trees and so on, there was no way of telling where the front line was. So they would shoot flak up to 10,000 feet to mark the front line, and then we would drop frag bombs, which were about 3 feet long and 2 inches in diameter. And we had 360 of them in each bomb bay. And so we would go and lay the flak, bombs in beyond the front lines, and then of course there was no resistance. We also used them on a supply depot in northern Italy where the Germans brought the troops and material and so on in Germans figured, well, hey, they'll never hit us twice in the same spot. So they moved fresh troops and material in, and on Tuesday we hit them again. Then on Wednesday we laid off, so the Germans once more moved more troops and material in. We hit them on Thursday, and the Italian campaign folded after that because they didn't have the manpower or the material. Now, I was assigned to ferry gasoline to the partisans in Yugoslavia. These were the Serbs. This is why I have a hard job with the present regime, because the Serbs were the ones that helped us get back if we were shot down. I was fortunate enough not to, but between the French underground and the Serbs in our area in Yugoslavia, there was almost 6,000 of the airmen that were brought back to their outfits one way or another. They used to hide them in the bottom of loads of hay and a little bit of everything over there. And so they needed gasoline real bad. They gave me a co-pilot and a navigator that was briefed on a cow pasture back in the Yugoslavian hills, and an engineer. Then they filled the rest of the 17 with 5-gallon cans of gasoline. And I'll tell you, it was a little bit of a worry with that much gasoline aboard, you know, that if the Germans would catch us, why it wouldn't be so much fun. But what it actually turned out to be was actually a cow pasture, and it had a tree claim on each side, so it was just like a runway, only a lot wider. And as soon as we landed, it was a pretty rough landing because there was nothing smoothed out. They'd taken the cows out, thank goodness. But, then the Serbs would come running out from the sides in the tree claims because they kept out of sight until after we landed. And in about 20 minutes or so, we kept the engines running, and about 20 minutes they'd have us unloaded. Well, one time, an Army nurse come running out, and she asked me for a ride back to Foggia. I told her, gee, I'd sure like to take you, but you know, we only checked out 4 parachutes this morning, and so I don't have an extra parachute. She says, well, I need to get back to my outfit. She says, I'll go without a parachute. And well, I couldn't have that. And you know how it is, if you're driving a car, you feel more comfortable than if you're riding. And so I gave her my parachute and brought her back. I never did see her again. I don't know really too much about the particulars, but the Serbs were really good people over there. And now, I don't know how many of you have seen a very pistol, but this is what we had for signaling. It had a shell about 1.5 inches in diameter by 4 inches long, just like a shotgun shell. And it was had 3 balls in it, so when fired it looked an awful lot like a Roman candle. And each day we were briefed on a different set of colors. And if a ship on the water or another aircraft challenge you, you better shoot the right colors up, otherwise they'd shoot you down. Because the Germans used to get a plane and fly up and catch our altitude, and then that would make their flak much more effective. Well, one day, Pete, a friend of mine, co-pilot, head and shoulders above me. He didn't like the idea the Germans were shooting at him, and he didn't have anything to shoot back. He had his .45, but so he grabbed the very pistol, and he pulled back his co-pilot's window, and holding it in both hands, he fired at the German pilots. Well, when they debriefed us that night, they said, "Hey, what's this deal? The German pilots are complaining that the B-17s are shooting rockets at them." Well, we just had to tell them it was Pete and his very pistol, but anyhow, you can imagine if you've seen 3 colored balls coming at you, you'd kind of be a little bit worried. And I was sent up to northern Italy one time to pick up a crew that crashed in the mountains. They thought that they were going to fly down through the mountains, through the pass. Well, all of a sudden he made a wrong turn, and here was a great big mountain in front of him. And so he tried to climb up, and he got partway up when all of a sudden the downdraft coming over the mountain plunked him into the side of the mountain. But they landed on a little knoll, and of course the airplane broke apart. The guys in the front end run out on the one side, and they said, "Oh, those poor guys in the back, they watched to burn." And the guys in the back, they run out the other side, and oh, those poor guys in the front. But actually all that happened was there was a bunch of broken bones and so on. But when I landed in northern Italy to pick them up, why, I noticed this FW-190 sitting alongside of the bone pile. And so I asked some of the guys what the score was on it. And I said, well, the German pilot came in and surrendered, and we flew his airplane around until it acted up, and then we went to work and pulled it over in the bone pile. Now, see, in those days, if a German pilot told his superiors that he didn't want to fly, they just shot him. And after a few times of that, the guys figured, well, if I'm going to get shot, I might as well go up and fight, you know, and take my chances. But this German pilot had decided that his chances were not very good, so he had come in and surrendered. Well, excuse me, anyhow, I walked over to the FW-190. I wanted to take a good look at it. And I was admiring the beautiful lines on the propeller on it. And I put my hand on it. Whoops, there was something wrong, because anything aluminum in that hot sun should have been boiling hot. And this wasn't. So I looked it over and found it was painted olive drab. I found out that it was made out of plywood. Well, I knew the guys back at the base would laugh at me out if I had told them that it was a German fighter plane with a plywood prop. And so I managed to carve this little piece out of it with my penknife. And that's as far as I could get, but at least I could prove to the guys that the Germans were so hard up for aluminum that they were using plywood props. And I've heard since that the British also used plywood props on some of their Spitfires. Now in 1944, it cost around $40,000 to train a pilot. The B-17 cost around $250,000. The bombing of Germany, including the 8th and the 15th Air Forces, cost $43 billion. There were 29,000 airmen killed between the 8th and the 15th, and 44,000 wounded. We lost 8,237 bombers and 3,924 fighter aircraft. You can see it was quite a thing. I was hit in the shoulder one time by a piece of flak that came through the side of the ship, and it hit me on the shoulder here. Then it glanced on out and went out again. And see, we had a flak suit that came down across our shoulders, underneath our arms, and down between our legs. But our arms and legs were not protected as well as our head. But of course, we had a helmet on, which would help. But all I got out of it was a very sore shoulder. But you can imagine if I hadn't had that flak suit or bulletproof vest, whatever you want to call it, on, why, it would have really ripped up my shoulder. So I was very, very glad about that. Now, if you asked an airman if he was superstitious, he'd say, go on. I'm not superstitious, but there were certain things that he wouldn't do because the taboo said, for an example, turning back from the first mission was a very bad omen. So now when they sent a green crew into combat, they always sent a veteran pilot with them the first 5 missions. And I was checking out a green crew on their first mission. And we'd run our engines up and everything on the strip. And then we went down the runway, and going down the runway, our inverter burned out. This is what turned your superchargers on. And without that, I tell you, I can still see that plowed field at the end of the runway. But we just managed to get airborne and stay airborne. And of course, then we changed the inverter, and there was no problem. And so I called the tower and told them what had happened, and they said, well, you've got two choices. One, you can go on to the target and act as though nothing happened and hope that that inverter won't burn out. The other is you can go out in the Adriatic and dump your bombs and come on back. So I polled the crew, man for man, and asked them which they wanted to do. And to a man, they said, let's go to the target. So you see, they may not have been superstitious, but they weren't going to take no chances. Now, we had 1,720 gallons of gasoline on that 17 when we were fully loaded. And we came back about 50% of the time with holes in our airplane. I seen a shell one day burst right between 2 of the engines. I thought, oh boy, there goes those 2 engines, you know. But surprising enough, nothing happened. And the reason I say I seen it burst is because I seen the red center of the shell as it went off. When you seen that red center, why, that was the center of the explosion. And when I got down, I went out there and I inspected it, and I was shocked. There was a lot of holes, but it was nothing drastic. And after talking to some of the ordnance people, they said, well, the reason for that is because the shell, when it burst, the explosion and everything goes upward. So the fact that it was between the 2 engines didn't really, could have been a lot worse anyhow. And we had 4 1,200 Wright Cyclone engines and 1,200 horsepower and 13 50 caliber machine guns. This is the reason why when you put Squadron together with that much firepower, the Germans thought twice about attacking a formation, but they would always try to pick off a straggler if somebody dropped out of formation. We lost an engine one day going to the target, and Of course, normally we climbed all the way to the target in order to get up around 32,000 feet. And so we told the bombardier, drop the bombs, because we weren't going to be able to keep up with 3 engines with a full load of bombs. So bombardier called back a couple minutes later, and hey, he says, you know, some farmer down there is madder than all get out at us because they walked across this field right into his farmhouse. Well, of course, we had no quarrel with the poor farmer, but we were looking out for ourselves. And we pulled full takeoff power for 45 minutes in order to stay up with the formation. And then when we got the target, well, we skirted around it because we didn't want to take a chance on losing another engine. So we had no problem when we got back. Well, they scrapped the 3 engines that we had, because we were only supposed to pull full takeoff power for 5 minutes, which was the norm. Now, work can be kind of fickle because one of my buddies went to work and he lost an engine the same as we did, but he went to work and decided he wasn't going to waste his bombs. So he called his navigator and he says, navigator, give us a plot for the nearest, biggest rail yard you can find. So he went over there and he donated his bombs to him. And he came back, and when he told the debriefing officer what happened, why, they arrested him because he bombed an unauthorized target. But his guardian angel was sitting on his shoulder that day because 1 out of 7 airplanes had a camera aboard to record the bomb strikes, and he happened to have the camera aboard. And so when they looked at the bomb strikes, they couldn't believe their eyes, so they sent out a recon plane to re-photograph it. Then they called him in, and they said that we found out that there was 3 big troop trains in that rail yard that you bombed, and you put several thousand troops out of action, at least temporarily or otherwise. So we're dropping the charges, but and we'll give you the Silver Star. Now my navigator and I decided one day that we wanted to get a radio to listen to Axis Sally because she would play some of the latest hits. And so I explained the first half that I had taken a couple of bottles of American whiskey with me. So one of the guys said, hey, he says, I think that if you go down to Signal Corps, they can build you a radio out of scrap parts. So I took the bottle and rolled it up in newspaper, and I went down and found the captain in charge and went up to him and said, what do you want? And I told him, I said, I heard that there's a possibility of getting a radio built from scrap parts. And he says, man, Lieutenant, did you ever hear a wrong one? No way. He says, well, I said, I got something I'll swap for it. And he said, what's that? And so I opened up the thing just so he could see the 4 Roses label. And his eyes bugged out, and he pulled open his desk drawer, pushed it in there, and shoved it. Come back Thursday. Well, now, we didn't have any speakers on our equipment over there in those days. So the headphones had a metal diaphragm, and they soldered a wire on that, in the center of that, and brought it out, and then they made a paper cone and shellacked it, and you know, it made a pretty doggone good speaker. we could understand pretty well, and I'm very, very sorry that I gave the radio to my cousin, and I don't know what he did with it. He couldn't find it, but I'd sure love to have that now. And the hero on our crew, we didn't understand what a hero he was until after the war. We were in Newport News getting ready to get aboard the boat when the tail gunner went to work and slashed his wrists. And so they took him off our crew, and Sandy had come back from England and had been on leave, and and so he volunteered to go over with us. Well, all that we were told is that he had survived 2 tours of duty in England when only 20% came back from one. And he never really said much about it. You couldn't get him to talk about what went on, but he volunteered for every mission that he could get his hands on. In other words, whenever we weren't flying, why, he would go to work and volunteer if anybody needed an engineer. And so number 66 got him, and that was the hardest letter I ever had to write, because the other planes in the area said there was 2 planes that went off, one blew up and the other one went down, and I couldn't tell his grandmother whether he was alive or dead. And I just really, but we found out afterwards, while he was in England, he was the only enlisted man that had an airplane named after him. Now, if you look at the nose art, you'll see Smiling Sandy Sanchez. And this was a guy, he had saved a barracks full of airmen when a runaway plane took off and was headed for the barracks. He jumped in and managed to get it stopped in time. Excuse me. So he had every medal except the Congressional Medal of Honor. And they've never been able to find his body, but they did find the tail section of the airplane, and they've got that in a museum at Joliet, Illinois, and they named a park after him. And then they also, last year, they put a bronze statue of him there. And this is one story that I'm not going to put on the tape that I'll make for the Richard Baum deal, because I'm afraid it might give kids ideas. But you know, we had to get up around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, so our sleep really meant a lot to us. Well, when we weren't flying, well, our time was our own. You know, you could do what you wanted. Well, this one guy, he'd go to town and he'd get drunk, and he'd come home. Well, then all of a sudden he got the idea, hey, he'd go in the orderly room, and he'd go to work and get on the PA system and say, hey guys, now this is about 1 o'clock in the morning, hey guys, you're going to have to get up pretty soon. And then he'd laugh, and then he'd sing. Well, I'll tell you, he wasn't no singer. So the first time was bad. Second time, I figured something had to be done. So I went to work and I pulled the lead out of a 45 round, and I packed cardboard on top of the powder. Then I built up a shell that was about 3 times as long as the original one of hard candle wax. So the third time he did it, I waited until after he stumbled by the tent, and I stepped out, and in the moonlight I could see him real good, so I let him get about 30 feet away, and I aimed at his rear and squeezed off around. He let out one yelp and started running. Well, the next day I seen him, but I never ever saw his face, but I seen him from the back side, and there was a 3-inch circle right on his back pocket. So I had nailed him right where it was supposed to be. You know what? He never sang again. I had one, after the war I was sent over to Japan as Army of Occupation. I was put in charge of a supply section, and I had Japanese nationals working for me, and I had GIs and American civilians. Now the Japanese were all college graduates, and you could show them the Cardiac system, and they would never ever think of deviating one iota from what you told them. And because they had been taught since they were small in those days, it was good enough for your great-grandfather, it was good enough for your grandfather, it was good enough for your father, now it's good enough for you, so don't ask questions. Well, the GIs, you go to work and show them the system, and 3 hours later you come back and checking on them, and they're already trying to figure a way around that would be theoretically shorter, even if it was a long way around. And this is what made us great, is because we were able to think for ourselves. Now the Japanese were great copy artists, but they had not been trained to think. I hope that they're a little bit better now. But anyhow, that concludes. Thank you for being so patient.